On to other news tonight, a cold-blooded killer is on the loose. A mother, father, and son are found murdered inside of their home.
A triple homicide investigation is underway in San Bernardino County neighborhood after the bodies of 3 people were found inside a home, all with gunshot wounds.
The chilling murders of Sonia, George, and David Ramirez shocked the quiet community of Montclair, California in January 2023. Found executed in their own home, the investigation into their deaths would uncover secrets hidden beneath the surface of their family life. Was this a case of gang retaliation, an inside job, or something far more personal? The search for answers would lead investigators through a tangled web of lies, betrayal, and unexpected twists, ultimately revealing the most unlikely suspect. This is the true story of the Ramirez family murders. On January 30th, 2023, the lifeless bodies of 68-year-old Sonia Ramirez, 66-year-old George Ramirez, and their son, 43-year-old David, were discovered inside their home. Each victim had been shot multiple times. It appeared to be a targeted attack. There was no sign of a robbery, and the house had not been ransacked. Authorities immediately suspected someone close to the family might be responsible, possibly someone with a motive connected to David's past. David, a man with a criminal history tied to drug deals and gang affiliations, quickly came under suspicion. His troubled past had brought him into contact with dangerous people. Could his enemies have come back to settle old scores, or was the cause of his death more complicated, involving his own family? As detectives probed deeper into David's life, they identified a potential suspect, a former associate from his past dealings in the criminal world. This man had been involved in shady business ventures with David, and a recent falling out between them raised suspicions. A possible drug debt was thought to be the motive. This theory seemed plausible. However, as the investigation unfolded, detectives quickly learned that the former associate had an airtight alibi for the night of the murders. No physical evidence tied him to the crime scene. Just as one lead turned cold, another suspect emerged from the shadows. Another angle was pursued. What if the killers had been looking for something other than drugs or money? Could it have been something within the family itself? A hidden motive tied to long-standing grievances and personal issues? Enter Pete Renteria, a relative of the victims who immediately caught the attention of investigators.
Homicide detectives have now identified a suspect wanted in a triple murder last month in Montclair.
Pete, who had a criminal record of his own, had long been at odds with his grandparents, Sonia and George. Tensions between Pete and his family members had been rising for months, fueled by personal disputes and financial disagreements. Although Pete had a history of violent altercations, there was no concrete evidence directly linking him to the crime. In fact, when questioned, Pete denied any involvement, claiming he hadn't even been in the area. Still, a neighbor's testimony raised questions when they recalled seeing a suspicious car, matching Pete's vehicle, near the Ramirez house just before the murders occurred. Pete's denials didn't sit well with investigators, but the evidence against him was circumstantial. Could this be a case of someone trying to cover their tracks, or was Pete simply a victim of misfortune, caught up in a web of suspicion? As if the situation weren't complicated enough, another potential suspect emerged. A former lover of David Ramirez was identified. The two had a turbulent relationship, and friends and family knew that emotions ran high whenever they crossed paths. Had jealousy and resentment finally pushed this woman to commit the ultimate act of revenge? While the lover's presence near the Ramirez home prior to the murders was notable, there was no hard evidence linking her to the crime. No fingerprints, no DNA, and no surveillance footage of her near the scene when the murders took place. This lead, too, was ultimately ruled out. With each suspect cleared and no physical evidence pointing to any one individual, detectives were at a loss. The case had grown colder by the day, and the Ramirez family's fate seemed more mysterious than ever. Months into the investigation, a new breakthrough came when forensic evidence surfaced. DNA samples and fingerprints found at the crime scene were traced back to Pete Renteria. The pieces of the puzzle were finally coming together. The surveillance footage from a nearby store confirmed that Pete had been in the area on the night of the murders. The evidence was compelling, but would Pete finally crack under the pressure? On March 15, 2023, Pete Renteria was brought in for questioning again. This time, there was no denying the facts. Faced with irrefutable forensic evidence and mounting pressure, Pete finally confessed to the murders of his grandparents and uncle. His confession was chilling. In his confession, Pete explained that the killings had been the result of a long-simmering conflict within the family. Financial struggles, personal animosities, and old wounds had culminated in a brutal act of violence. He shot Sonia and George first, and when David tried to intervene, Pete shot him too. It was a calculated and cold-blooded act, one that Pete justified as a means of taking control of his life. The trial of Pete Renteria began later that year, with the prosecution laying out the facts, an execution-style murder carried out in cold blood by a family member. With Pete's confession and the solid forensic evidence, the case seemed clear-cut. However, his defense team attempted to argue that Pete had been in a fragile mental state, unable to fully comprehend the consequences of his actions. Despite these efforts, the jury found Pete guilty on all 3 counts of murder. The sentence? Life in prison without the possibility of parole. The community of Montclair was left reeling, and the surviving family members were left to cope with the aftermath of a loss that could never be fully explained away. The Ramirez case is a stark reminder of how buried family tensions, unresolved conflicts, and long-held grievances can suddenly explode into unimaginable violence. What seemed to be a case of gang-related retaliation turned out to be the result of a fractured family, driven to violence by years of anger and frustration. Pete Renteria's confession brought closure to the investigation, but the haunting memory of the Ramirez family murders will remain in the minds of those who followed the case. Thank you for watching this in-depth breakdown of the Ramirez family murders. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like, subscribe, and leave a comment with your thoughts. Until next time, remember, sometimes the most dangerous secrets lie within our own families. Don't forget to comment, like, and hit that subscribe button. Follow us on all social media platforms at Inland Empire Stories.
Wanted for the crime, but they also say he is related to the victims. They did not release how he's related, but on January 30th, Sonia, George, and David Ramirez were all found shot to death inside their home on Ramona Place. Deputies had originally said they didn't believe the shooting was random. There's no word, though, on the whereabouts of Renteria.